Welcome there, everybody. This is your instructor, Jamie Schramm. Week 10 of our corporate strategy decision-making class. As I mentioned in our announcements, I was going to make a short video. And some of you I know like to go back and watch the recordings of our class. We had a small group show up on Tuesday night for class, and we made an executive decision that we would just everybody do it online and relax for the rest of Tuesday evening. So here I am putting together just a short talk on a couple of the topics. They get into the topic of strategic leadership, and really separating leadership from strategic leadership might be kind of difficult. I will propose to you that on some level, all leadership is strategic, right? Now, it might be larger, smaller strategic items. It might be external or internal strategic items. But when you're leading and you're influencing, there's always a strategy behind it. Even if you're influencing a colleague, a peer, someone who reports to you, you're doing some org development stuff, there's always a strategy or piece behind it. Our text dove into the strategic decision-making process. I don't know that there's a real a roadmap that's quite that detailed that you can always follow when you're in strategic decision-making. But they do talk about the mission and vision of your organization. That's very important. Sometimes we look past or we discredit mission and vision statements, and they're very important in our organizations because they help us decide what we should be doing, what we should say yes to, and then the important piece is what we say no to, right? Because I think we know on multiple levels, as an organization, we can't be all things to all people. And when we try, it usually ends pretty badly. And then the other piece is on a personal level, right? We can't say yes to every person who asks for our time or asks us to be part of their organization. It's just impossible, right? So at some point, we do have to say no, right? Doesn't mean we don't take their calls. Doesn't mean we maybe don't give them some advice. But, a large-scale commitment, we can't say yes to everybody, right? If we try, we're really no good to anyone. So we have to remember that. That our mission and vision at times, especially our mission statement, yes, it informs us what we should say yes to. It informs what we're great at or what we believe we're great at, but it also informs us of what we should say no to. And that's kind of an internal message, right? And I think an internal message for key top strategic leaders in an organization, does this fit? It might be cool, it might be fun, it might be something we should get into 5 years from now, but right now it's just not where we're at and not where we should be, right? That's not how we gain a strategic competitive advantage. The other thing with mission and vision statements that we have to be really careful about, I know some organizations like to write these lengthy mission and vision statements, and they have people wordsmith them, and they probably have marketing people and public relations people look at them. But really, it should be pretty simple. If you can't remember any part of your mission statement or your vision statement, how do you know what to do every day? How do you know what to excel at? How do you know what to say yes to? Right? So my own personal opinion has been, and I know this is shared and it's debatable, that the shorter your mission statement can be, the better, right? Because if your people know the mission statement and it's one sentence or one line, something they can repeat very easily, as long as it's relevant and as long as it's accurate to what you're trying to do and what you excel at, right? That's great, because now your people can have that in your mind, your staff, your team, your organization, and this is what we do. This is who we are, right? Rather than, 6 paragraphs of a mission statement that you don't remember by the time you're in the middle of the third paragraph what the first one said. So I think it's kind of important and something to keep in mind. Certainly, strategy and strategic decision-making is all about the competitive advantage, as we talked about throughout the semester. You choose the wrong strategy and nothing else really matters. Even exceptional talent can't overcome poor strategic decision-making, right? We actually waste the talents of our people. So as I mentioned, separating strategic leadership from leadership, that's always kind of a challenge. As I said, I think all leadership on some level is strategic. Just like the author and leadership expert, well, he wouldn't consider himself an expert because he would say no one's really an expert at leadership. But a lot of people do consider him an expert. John Maxwell, separating strategic leadership from leadership might be kind of a tough thing to do. He would always say separating ethics from business ethics, there's no difference, right? And he always talks about that he's been asked many, many times to teach a class or give a lecture or a presentation or write a book on business ethics. And he said, no. He goes, there's no such thing as business ethics. He said, there's just ethics. And if you're an ethical person and you strive to be an ethical person, those kind of decision-making and that kind of thinking works in business. It works really well. And it kind of something I'll probably talk about next week a little bit when we talk about leadership. The things which make you a great person at home, maybe a great spouse, great significant other, a great family member, a great parent, whatever that looks like, the things that make you great in that world are the same things that make you great at work. You might apply them differently, but the values and the things that drive it and the inspiration and the why, as Simon Sinek would say, the why behind that, it's all the same, right? And the sooner we realize that, right, and the sooner we see that, the stronger and better we become, right? The stronger and better we become as a person, physically, mentally, and spiritually, and the stronger we become to the people around us. So this, strategic decision making or leadership, it can't just be left to the CEO or even one or two people, right? That's why a lot of organizations nowadays have leadership teams, right? And you see a team of people together because they're a strategic leadership team, and they can support, right? So just as any one of us knows, right, we can't be great at everything, right? We maybe have 3, maybe 4 things that we're really good at. We need people around us who fill in the blanks, right? And that's important. Talk about this we're going to talk about this more next week, but they introduced this concept here this week of transformational leaders, right? And sometimes this gets presented, I don't know that our text did it, but sometimes it gets presented that if we were all just transformational leaders, we would have no bad leaders, right? Well, transformational leadership is great. And in many ways, it's about servant leadership, right? How can I take all my experiences, all my knowledge, all my formal education, all my on-the-job training, my work experiences, my life experiences, all my network, my contacts, the people I know, right? How can I take that and pour that into someone else, right? That's the concept of servant leadership, right? Take everything that I have that might be valuable to someone else and pour it into them and do it without any expectation of anything ever in return, right? That's a great thing to be able to do, right? It's exciting and it's kind of inspiring when you get the chance to do that. In this transformational leadership, right, it's all about other people. Developing other people, what are their interests, what motivates them, why do they come to work, what do they like to do, all those types of things, right? So the transformational leadership, when they say transformational leaders have people who report to them that are more inspired, they have higher level of job satisfaction, and we've known this for decades. We've known this, and this comes back to just basic management 101, right? If as a leader and a manager, you walk into someone's office and say, "How was your weekend? Did you watch the big game this weekend? Did you do anything fun? Hey, I remember you said your kid had a soccer game. How did that turn out?" Those little conversations, which have nothing to do about work, drive work performance, right? And we know that. There's been, like I said, studies in leadership and studies in management for decades in that. But transformational leaders do engage in those kinds of conversations, right? That doesn't mean that they don't drive for results. It doesn't mean that they shy away from difficult conversations. It doesn't mean they don't say no, right? There's a notion that to be a good leader, I have to say yes to everything or I have to be popular. That's not the case, right? And the best leaders I've seen, they kind of chuckle at that and they roll their eyes a bit at that. Leadership isn't about being popular, right? Sometimes we have to make tough decisions, right? And we have to understand that and respect that of people that are in leadership roles. So transformational leaders, they're very heavily about people. They're invested in people. They definitely, I think, embrace servant leadership. Are they perfect leaders? By no means. I was just having a conversation with someone over this past weekend, about this topic of leadership. And I said, anyone who's a true leader would never call themselves or would never call someone else a leadership expert because they know there's no experts when it comes to leadership, right? And some of the stuff I've read and some of the people that I've heard talk, they'll even say, like, the good leaders, they're barely better than 50% plus one, right? 50% plus one, maybe 60%. They screw it up often enough, but they get it right often enough, and they have a true servant motive and intention that the people around them kind of see that. So when they screw it up, they're willing to rally and give them a pass, right? But people that are in leadership roles, they don't necessarily make better decisions, right? A lot of times they ask better questions. We'll talk about that next week. But, this notion that leaders get decisions right a lot of times they don't, right? But they also know what to do, how to recover, right? They understand the risks in their decisions, and they know if the risks actually come true, right, become reality, what they need to do, right? It talked a little bit about, managerial discretion and where that comes from. So, we definitely, as we've talked about all semester, we need to be scanning the external environment. That's really important, right? When we take our finger off the pulse of the external environment, bad things can happen in business. We can miss a new competitor, we can miss a startup, we can miss a new technology, right? And there's all sorts of examples of businesses that have done that, right? Historical examples. So knowing and understanding our external environment is important, right? We also can't just focus on our direct competitors, right? Because we've seen organizations that have done that, right? They get so hyper focused on the person who makes almost the exact same thing I do, right? But they fail to realize that there's a new technology or new application maybe in our industry, right? That is spawning that startup, that innovator, that entrepreneur that maybe isn't a direct competitor, but they're going to be sooner or later, right? Or they're not going to be a direct competitor because they're going to change our industry. They're going to do something disruptive, and it's going to completely change our industry. And they're not going to be a direct competitor. They're going to own the industry, right? And just a couple examples of this to look at. So the automobile industry, right? If I'm producing automobiles, right, I have to look at, okay, what are other modes of transportation, right? Someone could decide to keep their car longer, or some selling new cars, they could decide to buy a used car. They could decide to buy a motorcycle if they're in the right climate, take a bike, take the bus, take public transportation, carpool, right? But then we also have to ask, that's a fairly big purchase that most people make in their lives, right? So what are other things that are competing with a significant share of wallet of that consumer or of their family, right? Could they decide to do home repairs? Could they decide to buy a new home? Could they decide to go on a vacation, right? And use that money for those kinds of things instead of that large automobile purchase. So we do need to keep those kind of things in our mind as we scan that external environment. Certainly the organizational culture inside, we want to make sure that it is enriching and enhancing and helping to lift to another level our strategy. And then, of course, just the characteristics of the leader. What are they like, right? How do they make decisions? What are they like? Are they temperamental? Are they patient? Are they, maybe at times some of the people around them say they're too patient, right? Or maybe they're too impatient. Those are all important things as we consider how decisions are made at the leadership level in our organizations. One of the biggest challenges is leadership succession in our organizations. And we've talked about a couple companies during this semester. Starbucks, right? Why does Howard Schultz have to keep on coming back, right? And you think about leadership succession and taking the time to develop a strong leadership team and develop a strong bench, right? A sports analogy. Who's sitting on your bench? Who can you bring into the game, right? And as good of Howard Schultz has been as a leader of getting Starbucks to this point, and every time he comes back, it seems to be good for Starbucks. I think, part of his leadership has to be critiqued and judged and scored upon. He hasn't been able to develop someone to take his place so he doesn't have to come back, right? And we've seen this in organizations, right? Where an organization kind of strays from their maybe mission and vision, strays from their culture, and that very dynamic, that very bigger than life leader constantly has to kind of come back and get them back on track, right? So the real goal for that leader that has to keep coming back, they know how to get the organization back on track. They know how to get the focus. They know how to make great strategic decisions. What they have to do is figure out a way to develop their successor, right? And of course, that's not just the role of the CEO. The top leadership team, their executive team, the board of directors has to be involved in that, right? But what does that look like, right? How do we either internally develop that new CEO or the new top leaders in our organization, or how do we get them from somewhere else, right? And then integrate them in our organization and get them in aligned with our culture. The problem with having to hire from someone else, right, is you have to steal their talent, and especially in today's environment, stealing someone else's talent usually means you have to overpay for them, right, to get them to come to your organization. And then kind of the last thing they put at the end of this chapter is the whole concept of a balanced scorecard, right? And this is really important. This is important not only for strategic decisions, not only for results, not only the financial health of the organization, and to make sure you're delivering value, right? There's all sorts of metrics you can measure, right, for a balanced scorecard. But the other piece of this is, right, there's an internal message to this, right? So ask yourselves, when you left work today, do you know what the score of the game was, right? Do you know what the score of the game was? So the Brewers played today and they won. It was a great win. It was a walk-off home run, right? They swept the Mets. And the score of the game was 7-6. So the Brewers know whether they won or lost, right? They know they scored 7 runs. That was good, right? They gave up 6 runs, so there might be some, thoughts around that, around defense or pitching or matchups or things like that. But they know they won the game, right? And they know probably things they need to work on and get better at and focus on, and they know things that they did really well. Right? So think about it in your own job. When you left work today, did you know the score of the game? Do you know the things when you go back tomorrow, right? Tomorrow morning when you go to work or whenever you go back to your next day, the things that you need to repeat and continue to do because it's creating value, right? It's creating value for your coworkers, for your customers. It's creating value for your own, financial well-being and your own job career, right? And then the things maybe that aren't working so well, maybe things you should stop doing, right? So having that scorecard, knowing what the score of the game is, right? It's very important in our organization, right? And, a piece of that with keeping a scorecard, you have to decide what are the metrics that matter? What are the things we need, that ties again to your culture, your strategy, But when you're deciding the metrics that you measure, and some of you may be familiar with this, the concept of lead measures or lag measures, right? So we can add up all of our sales for a month, right? And at the end of the month, the 30th or the 31st of the month, we can tally up all of our sales, right? And if we hit or exceed our goal, it's good. But if we're short of our goal, it's like, well, wow, we just wasted the last 30 days, right? Is there something that could have told us during those 30 or 31 days that we were going to come up short, right? So lag measures are things that we measure after the fact, right? They're the results, and we tally them up, and they're very easy. They're very easy to identify, lag measures, and they're very easy to share, right? And there's some value in that. But are there lead measures? Are there indicating measures, right? Are there things that if we would measure during the month, they would almost be predictive of our success or predictive of our shortcomings, right? Because if I knew on the 15th of the month that I was behind in sales for the month, or I was behind in customer calls, or I was behind in quality, or safety was, a challenge in my organization, right? Or new memberships, or whatever it is, or subscriptions, or however we're doing, right? Patient care, right? If I knew I was lagging behind in the middle of the month, or something that could predict that, be predictive of that, right? And help me so that at the end of the month, I didn't even have to look at the number. I knew I was there because of something I was measuring each day or each week during the month. Those are predictive measures. Those are lead measures. They're very hard to identify, right? They're much, much harder to identify. But when you do identify them, they're much more influential, right? So lead measure is predictive measure, hard to identify, but they're very influential. Once we measure them and we know how to influence them in a positive way, they can really lift your organization to new heights. Problem is they're really difficult to identify, but they're there, right? Lag measures are very easy to identify. We just add up and tally the score, right? But the problem is they're after the fact. They're reactive, right? So if you can identify lead measures in your industry or in your organization, I would challenge you to do that, right? It'll make your balanced scorecard a much stronger scorecard, and it'll help your staff. When you talk about being a transformational leader and helping them be successful, that will do it. So with that, here's a few just high points from what was in the chapter about strategic leadership. Hopefully everyone can join us next week. Next week is week number 11, and I'm going to really dive into this topic of leadership. I really want to hit this hard. I think, all the different things we talked about, the strategic decision-making, corporate governance, business-level strategy, corporate-level strategy, your company updates, some of the analysis that you poured into them, some of the really good analysis that come up in your case studies, right? All of that is so indicative of leadership, right? And we've talked about how we influence our organization and how we view and analyze the rest of the world, right? But, you probably noticed a little bit, in the last couple of weeks, we kind of turned your back on ourselves. We turned that mirror around and, okay, what's my role as the leader? So next week, hopefully you can join us, week number 11, and I'm going to really talk about leadership, kind of dive in deep and heavy on it, and just throw some thoughts or ideas and some things probably for you to reflect upon. But hopefully be able to join us. Otherwise, definitely, use the discussion board if you need to. If you can't join us, certainly feel free to watch the video next week after we're done. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Let me know. Otherwise, hopefully we'll see you back for week number 11 of our semester together. We're getting there. Thank you so much.